Welcome to the Mojo Mundi podcast, where it's all about magic, manifesting, and movement. I'm Ginny Watts, the Dancing Witch, and our episode follows one man's transformation as he answers the sacred call to passionate authenticity. I am interviewing Ken Wortley, author of the raw, tender memoir, The Gospel of Secrets, a memoir of truth, liberation, and love. The text is drawn from his therapeutic journaling and describes Ken's journey out of evangelical ministry and into soulful authenticity. This powerful alchemical path is archetypal. Ken chronicles the archetype as it transpires in the human realm. In doing so, he offers snapshots of myriad reverberations we initiate when we step into authenticity. What resonated for me in Ken's story is the contrast between religion and spirituality. For many people, religion and spirituality are synonymous. For an ever-increasing number of people, however, these are separate and not necessarily harmonious concepts. According to the rigorously supported Wikipedia article, Spiritual but Not Religious, the idea of differentiating spirituality from religion occurred in professional papers at least as early as the 1960s and was popularized in 2000 by author Sven Erlandsson in his book Spiritual but Not Religious. The phrase spiritual but not religious has become a moniker, often abbreviated SBNR, utilized to differentiate between the internal, personal relationship with deity and its concomitant idiosyncratic practices, and the external, social, political, and codified structures of organized religions. While Kevin Shilbrack, in his article The Concept of Religion, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, acknowledges that the concept of religion has, quote, evolved to a point that it threatens incoherence, he does consistently refer to religion as a social or cultural construct. Social and cultural constructs are by definition related to the other, rather than to the internal world of the individual. While many people are able to find a religion that is harmonious with their spiritual life, many others founder in religious institutions that substitute a relationship with a religious agent who is the intercessor between the seeker and God, consciously or unconsciously disrupting the deep spiritual connection between the seeker and the Creator. In other cases, though the message from the pulpit may contradict the assumption, many people become fixated on the rules, social norms, expectations, and judgments ingrained in the culture of a church or religion. In the process, the seeker substitutes the family, congregation, and institution for the deity being sought. Ken describes how this process circumvents authenticity.
I really felt growing up that I was in kind of a prison. Not a jail, but a prison constructed by my parents, my family, my religion, my church. They encouraged, I don't want to say dictated, because it wasn't so that I was an unhappy boy, but there was a direction that was given for my life. There was expectations. We grew up in a small family in Michigan. When the church was open, we were there. My mom and my dad were very active in the church. Apart from my older brother, our whole family was involved in the church. I got my identity from the church. I got my theology, my thinking, my core beliefs were given to me. As I grew, there was an expectation that I would do something about that faith. There was a time in which my aunts and my uncles, who were all involved in the same church, would come over, and when they came over, they would set up little foldable chairs in the living room. And little Kenny Wortley would get a Bible, begin to preach to these chairs and to my relatives. Well, I was a sensitive boy also. I think I detailed in the book that it was really important for my father and my brother and my uncles all to go up to hunting.
Right.
Because in Michigan we hunted deer. One Christmas they were all really excited for me to open up my Christmas present, and there was a gun. They had given me a gun, and I went, oh my God, I don't want to shoot a gun. I don't want this gun. So I held it up with pride, and I played the part, and I acted well. In all respects, it was good to be a part of that family, but it was really a lot of tension for me to go
Right.
into that macho world. They had set me up in the middle of the woods, and my brother was so excited, and I kept on drilling me. Now make sure you shoot a deer that's got horns, so they were kind of aware that I really wasn't too into hunting, but make sure you shoot a deer with horns. And as dawn broke, there was this beautiful, magnificent deer just kind of trotting towards me. And I went, this is just torture, like what do I do, So one shot, and he dropped down. And I I whistled to my brother, and they all came, and there was this big celebration, and it was kind of like we were dancing around this animal, and for me, it was just empty, 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 empty. The funny part of the end of this story was I thought, okay, I'm glad that's over. I gave the gun back to my brother. I moved on. And so the following Christmas, they had mounted the head of the deer or the horns on a board and gave it to me for Christmas. And I went, I had been trying to forget this, and here I am with this present of the deer and the horns. I kept it all my life. Every time we
Yeah.
moved from city to city, I put it in the garage. So I would ride home in my car, and there would be these deer horns in my garage. And I thought, until one day, it was so old that it fell off the wall and busted. And I thought, oh, thank God that is over. Those kinds of trying all your life fit in, fit in, to being somebody that you're not. Learning to just acknowledge the expectations of others and live with it, and to try to work it out with those people, with everybody around you. And when I started off with saying I was a prisoner, but it was a prison that I constructed. It was something that I constructed with the expectations of all those people around me. Yeah. As I continued to grow, I really didn't know any other reality but the church and theology. I want to say that evangelism and the personal meaning of growing up as a young man, the expectation was that I would be a pastor, go on to seminary. So I enrolled in a liberal arts college in Philadelphia, studied sociology, and that kind of helped round the edges of my personal faith, kind of gave me a social justice bent to my faith. But still, all of this growing up, I was aware that I was attracted to men. And that belief and those thoughts were suppressed at all cost. When I entertained those thoughts, I quickly confessed them. So my faith was always receiving Jesus Christ as my personal savior, once, twice, three times, four times. Whenever there was an evangelist, whenever there was a faith healer, whenever there was a prayer service, whenever there was a way in which I could be relieved of these thoughts, maybe even a healing. So it was a major struggle to try to embrace my whole self, as you kind of put it in your notes. I like that. Expectations, judgments, thoughts of others. When I went to seminary, the seminary was in Philadelphia. I got a master's of divinity, and there was a road in which I thought, to be a good pastor, I'm going to need a wife. It wasn't necessarily romance, but it was a necessity to balance a single pastor. Back then, single pastors were kind of suspect. We weren't priests. And so, as an American Baptist, which I grew up in the Baptist faith, we loved pastors that had a good wife that could maybe play the piano. I married with the hope that she would help round my career path. But most importantly, the deeper hope was that these homosexual urges would kind of fade away also. That was kind of the end goal. That if I got married and had relations with a woman on a consistent basis, maybe those homosexual urges would fade away. The marriage, as we went from Colorado to Portland, Oregon, to Portland to the Bay Area to up to Spokane, Washington, I kind of figured that Spokane would be my last church. Like I was just really exhausted of pretending and preaching messages about the evils of homosexuality. I couldn't live with the inconsistency of having sermons about Adam and Eve and the perfect family, and yet still deep down inside had these thoughts. So I kind of thought, I really need to transition. So I kind of entertained that thought as we moved into Spokane. Spokane, I was in the church for another 8 years, but my marriage was just sociologists call it a dry shelf marriage. It was just kind of empty. We wouldn't talk much. We wouldn't share much. We were still good friends. We had 2 children by then. We were able to go to all the boys' sports games and do that as 2 partners, as 2 people that lived together. Not much else. We lived in the same house and communication began to break down and we really weren't talking to each other at all. One day, out of the blue, and I'm not quite sure why or how or what precipitated that in her mind, but she came down the stairs and she says, I really want to talk to you. And I went, we haven't talked for a while. And she says, how long have you known you were gay? And that was the first time I had heard her say it. And it's the first time in our marriage of 20 some years we broached the subject. So she said, when did you know you were gay? I did in my typical fashion of telling the truth. I said, I'm not gay. And she looked at me and shook her head and said, you really do need to get some help. I've known for a long time that you're homosexual and you probably need to talk to somebody about that. And in the meantime, I think it's important that you move. She left and I was kind of in shock. My world was just really upside down from that point on. I found an apartment. I didn't know what kind of pots and pans to get because I had never lived by myself. I never lived on my own. And so began the long process of thinking. I didn't like being by myself. I didn't like to be alone. So I would go to the mall and sit with people, just to be with people. I went back to school and got a teaching degree, started teaching, and then got a second job so I could be busy and I could come home and just go to sleep. I began to look for therapists. And unfortunately, all the therapists that I went to wrote me prescriptions. So I had a pill to get me to sleep, a pill to wake me up, a pill when I started to cry, a pill to make me happy. All of those pills. I had like 6 of them that I tried that helped me carry on with my life. That was the beginning of the process, beginning to read books on homosexuality. Still plaguing me was my theology, my view of God. I really missed being a pastor, so I tried going back to church, to attend church. The music was good. Being with God's people was good. But every time the preacher got up and began to speak about the American family and how spiritual Adam and Eve, it's just like, oh, I can't live here. I can't do this. One pastor told me as we got to talking, I said, well, I'm going through divorce. I think I'm homosexual. And he goes, you're welcome to come to our church. You're welcome to attend. But we really don't want you to be involved with any of the ministries of our church. Even though I was very capable of running anything that he would put me. It was hard. It was a hard reality. I ended up going to a Lutheran church, which was high church for me. A lot of robes and candles and pomp and circumstance, all that for me was hard. But the messages were all about grace, which is some word that I always knew growing up, but it was grace that began to infiltrate my thinking. I still believed that God had made a mistake. But where was the grace? Where was the grace in that kind of thinking and in that kind of theology for me? Yeah. So it was a process. I began to work on that hard.
Once we recognize that our internal world is at odds, subtle or excruciating odds, with the path we are struggling to follow, a gateway opens. We stand on the threshold, uncertain whether our next step into congruence is a leap off the precipice or is simply an uncertain step into a new way of being. While finding our way is better than being lost, it is often a painful experience. When we leave our old incongruent path, we frequently feel not only relief, but also grief. Adding to the challenge of our own sense of loss, we find that leaving our old path means leaving behind old traveling companions, many of whom may be family, close friends, or employers and others on whom our livelihood, if not our survival, depends. Stepping into authenticity is a complex process, both painful and empowering. If we are willing, Deity offers us signposts along the way, helping us to traverse through the underbrush of old habits to discover the new heading that resonates with our soul. And, perhaps more important, we also find new companions who are here to travel with us.
A key book for me was Ben Brown in Australia, who has a similar biography, a famous pastor in Australia, and was married with children. And yet he struggled with his homosexuality, all of his ministry. So he wrote a book entitled A Life of Unlearning. Oh my gosh, I devoured that book in one night. I mean, I just ate it up and then read it again. And I thought, oh, I got to get in touch with this guy and let him know that he and I were like brothers. Well, little did I know that this is kind of a typical story, which is kind of interesting in the gay world. That, yeah, there are a lot of married gay guys that are closeted, that are not being honest, that are not being authentic. So the process was for me to unlearn a life of unlearning. I know now that the word is reconstruction of a faith, reconstructing a faith that would make sense. I guess I kind of realize now that all Christians, all religious people, gather significant Bible verses, and that becomes their Bible, apart from the rest of the Bible. A couple years ago, I ran into a Brazilian woman who told me all about how God hates homosexuals and they're going to hell. So she had constructed a theology in her Christian faith around the judgment of God. And when I began to talk to her about feeding the poor or social justice kinds of verses, she was confused. She went, what? I don't, I don't get it. I don't get it. And I kind of realized that was me. I was kind of like that I had constructed a faith that God doesn't make mistakes, that God doesn't forgive homosexuals if they keep acting on it and keep sinning. And that was the issue for a lot of religious people. It's okay to be gay, but you don't keep on sinning, you know. And many in the church would put homosexuality as a sin along with the other sins. Like, well, yeah, I sin too. Or, yeah, I eat too much, or I drink too much, or I lie a lot, or I smoke too much. All of that was homosexuality was born into that kind of sin. My partner always reminds me, he tells me, always in your podcast, tell the host and tell the audience, this is not a choice. And I think, well, yeah. He goes, no, 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 no. You're not saying that. I've heard your podcast like 3 or 4 times, and you never say that. It's like your blue eyes. You didn't choose your blue eyes. You didn't choose it. It came out of your DNA. It came out of your mom and your dad. Speaking of my mom, I finally did tell her after all of those months of trying to keep her and shield her from this truth because I didn't know how she would deal with it. And I told her, she kept on telling me, well, you need to go back and get divorce counseling and get a marriage counselor. And I got a good pastor. And she was always constant. Every time I would pick her up to go to the grocery store, she'd be like harping him, telling him, get some help. My son doesn't, we don't give up. Don't get a divorce. Go back to your wife. So I finally told her, Mom, I'm homosexual. You gave birth to a homosexual. And she said, when did this begin? How, can you get it fixed? Have you seen a doctor? And I'm going, yeah, this is hard. This is hard. She fell out of bed and broke her hip. As she recovered, she told me, she's okay. I'm moving back to Michigan. I can't deal with being with you. I can't listen to your pain anymore. I don't know what to do. And I said, well, I'm not asking you to help me or fix me. And so she moved back to Michigan. And then she died about a month later in Michigan. And I thought, and so my brother says, yeah, you killed your mom. And I went, no, but okay. So that was the process of unlearning, trying to reconstruct a new faith. I was reading everything I could get my hands on, whether it was gay literature or theology. I really needed to figure out, how do theologians and how does the gay community deal with scriptures and Bible verses that I had always bought into? How do they handle that? How do they deal with it? So I was trying to get as much as I could. I wonder at that time if I went back to seminary, if it would have helped me to hear a theologian deal with these scripture verses. Never in my seminary times did I hear anybody talk about these issues. A lot of social justice issues, a lot of feeding on the poor issues, but not necessarily gay people. I finally found a therapist, a little lady that sipped her tea and listened to me and didn't write me any prescriptions. In fact, urged me to just kind of wean myself off all of those narcotics, which I did. And she asked me a question like, have you ever thought about journaling, writing things down? And I went, oh, no, no, I don't do that. I'm a speaker. I'm a public speaker. I like to talk. No, no, no. She says, have you ever thought about just getting a cheap old notebook and begin to write down your thoughts, begin to write down your feelings, begin to write down your encounters with people, begin to write things that you've read and to summarize things. So I did. That was the best medicine. That was the prescription to the future. I grabbed a notebook, and on the back of my notebook, I wrote some messages, I am statements. And so I wrote these all over my apartment and all over everything that I could think of. I am whole. I am strong. I am well. I am loved. I am peace. And so there's this huge list of I am statements that I thought, wow, that was kind of a strategy I used. I'm a firm believer in sticky notes. So I have a sticky note on my mirror that when I brush my teeth and shave every morning, I see this. Start your day saying thanks. Start your day saying thanks. That has begun the process now of where I'm at now. How am I doing now? In these times of sharing again my story on podcast and in this book, I do have some, I'm just going to say unpleasant dreams of conversations with my wife or in the church, um, reliving the church life. I don't want to deceive your listening audience to say that reconstruction is easy. Reconstruction is work. It is a long, hard process. And beware, there's a possibility you're going to change. There's a possibility that things are not going to be the same. Now, you might want to welcome that. Most religious people don't want to change their thoughts. And I think about Ronald Reagan and his wife. They were very unique people, but they really didn't want to change their thinking politically, socially. And yet, thousands, millions of gay men, mainly, were dying around them. And they were not going to try to help, use the government to try to help AIDS epidemic in that time. I think they're probably good people, but they just didn't want to do the thinking or the work of reconstructing or the possibility that gay people are human beings, that they are their sons and daughters. You know, it's part of our psyche to go after a faith that is a mirror of who we are instead of pushing us to be a better man or a better woman. Living the authentic life. A friend of mine, a Catholic friend of mine who was a priest, who said, "You wrote my book. You before I could write it, you wrote my book." And I went, "Oh, I'm sorry." And he goes, "Well, I'm going to send you a poem called 'I Was Born a Liar.'" And I went, I was just on a podcast with a bunch of LGBTQ people, and we spent a good half an hour, 45 minutes talking about, do gay people lie? Are we lying people? Were we? And his point was, yeah, we were born to lie. We were born to protect ourselves, and it was for me, it was like, wow, you know. He goes, and what's the big deal about you telling the truth? You're gay for Pete's sake. Yeah, we want you to protect yourself and lie. And I'm going, yikes! It was thinking and words that I had never thought about. But I was a good pretender. Those stark words, I was a good liar. I protected everything I could. I went back to my church, one of my churches, and this was, I thought, well, I'm going to get the car and I'm going to do a road trip, and I'm going to stop at one of my churches and ask if I could say a few words. And they let me, and they were very happy to see me. They were really excited to see me. I spoke, I said, I was really happy to be your pastor. I really think some of my best times were here in this church. I kind of really, really laid it on. And I said, but you know what? I need to confess. I called you to be authentic. I called you to be real. But the whole time, I was not authentic with you and not real with you and with myself. That I have now discovered that I'm a gay man. I wish I had the courage to tell you. The service ended. Pastor says, the former pastor will be at the door if you want to greet him. And I was surprised by how many people walked by without shaking my hand or giving me a hug or touching me. I was surprised by how many people, maybe one or two people, that really embraced me and said, yeah, I I have a loved one. It's usually those kind of people that can identify with this message. That's all the package. That's a whole package of how we grow up. Our church is a part of that package. I had to be gentle because that was me. That was the whole package was the church, marriage and family and me.
Once we pass through the gateway, our soul has taken over the compass. Even as we struggle with loss and fear, deity is co-creating a new path with us. We begin the process of what Ken calls reconstruction. Like the Tower card in the tarot, sometimes the walls must come tumbling down in order to make room for a new way of living. The process of dismantling what we have built from a place of fear is a powerful and courageous daily, hourly, moment by moment choice. The outcome offers a life of authenticity in who we are, in how we live, and in our connection with the infinite.
Somebody wrote me a little note just a couple weeks ago and said, when the right person enters your life, it's not just love, it's transformation. They bring confusion or chaos. They bring clarity or calmness. They don't focus on your past. They see the strength in your scars. I like that. They inspire you to rise, to heal, to grow into the person you were meant to be. It's not just a relationship, it's a partnership in becoming the best self. At the end of my book, I hope more people pay attention to these last 2 pages. I put 10 ways that I live my life now, how I live my life now. And the first one is I find peace in something bigger than me. And that's that part about the ocean. Because this is a different culture and I live 2 blocks from the ocean, I can see the ocean as I'm speaking here. So it's nice. I live in a little area called Brisa Mar, which is the breeze of the ocean, which is kind of nice. I love putting my feet on the sand, the hot sand, and feeling that sensation. I love going into the water and feeling the salt taste on my lips and being pushed around by the ocean. I think I've learned that from the Brazilians that the ocean has some spiritual power. There's something spiritual about it. And so I traded my personal Lord and Savior personal faith for a grander faith of this God is huge. This God is mighty. This God is everywhere. This God is in nature. Vinicius loves birds, and so he's always feeding birds, and we have like little monkeys. So he's always talking to the animals and talking to the birds. Me, it's the ocean. Brazilians have this view that the ocean has this spiritual power. So I noticed that when I was there on the ocean, they would get into the water waist high and kind of baptize themselves with the water, kind of pour the water over their head, and then they would dive in and enjoy the water. I always thought that the ocean was an entertainment, but for them it's spiritual. It's 3 years now that I've discovered there is this powerful moment at 11:59 in which they all move from the stage area to the water. And the women are dressed in very beautiful gowns, and the men are dressed in suits and mostly white shirts and white pants. They take the shoes off, and so you look on the beach and you see all these shoes and possessions. But the rest of the crowd is in the water at the strike of the midnight ready. And they dive and get baptized and they kiss and hug each other and their family members. But it's a part of this ocean part, this water part that's got me intrigued, got me thinking about, well, maybe I should spend more time there. I need to learn more about the ocean. But it's huge. The ocean is mighty. It pushes me, my 6'3" body, it pushes me around like a paper cup. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. I can't win against the ocean. The ocean has some spiritual quality for me that has kind of converted me to think about how amazing, how big it is, the color, the smell, the sound. But the ocean is mighty. It's powerful. It's higher than me. Listen to these spiritual words. I hope your audience is hearing spiritual words as I describe something very physical. And the whole time I entertain, as entertainment has become spiritual. Has really become spiritual. I go swimming in a swimming pool a little bit to exercise, and at the end I can take the beach route home, which I always do. And so Venice is it's shorter if you take this route. Yeah, I know, but I always like going by the water and watching those waves come in. There, it's got me hooked. It's got me as a convert for sure. Second, living generously, giving away to people, giving freely to people. Because Venice, I am a wealthy American living in Brazil, I can give to people. I can give a part of my dollars, translated into reais, and make a huge difference in people's lives. Third, nurturing my physical temple. Now that's spiritual talk from the pastor. My body. Four, live in the present moment. Brazil has got a secret, and I want to learn that. We try to plan. I have calendars all over the house, but they don't plan. Well, this Friday, what are we going to do for? Well, whenever it gets there, we might. Let's just enjoy the present moment. You know? Embracing the present moment, releasing the grip of the past, regrets, and focusing right now upon the now. They're teaching me that. I can't say I'm fully there. Five, prioritizing my relationships with people, building bridges of love and friendship, listening with intention. I'm not a good listener. I really do need to listen. Talk with sincerity and be a friend who needs to lift people up. In this last podcast I did, I realized that every person carries a part of the core soul or the spiritual part of creation inside of us. All of us have aches and pains. We really don't know. 6, keep moving, keep moving. Resist passivity that comes with aging. Seek knowledge daily, seeking something new every day that I want to learn. Finally, I wake with gratitude with that poster on my mirror. 9, cultivate forgiveness, free my spirit from the weights of grudges, practice forgiveness and self-kindness. And then finally, number 10, live authentically with passion, with passion. And that's probably like a reformed smoker. That's the way I am. When I hear somebody lying, I say, why do you have to lie? Don't lie. Be truthful. Living authentically with passion.
Are you feeling the invitation to authenticity? A call to relinquish old constructions of fear in order to find a path of congruence? I am holding a dedicated space just for you, so you have room to move more fully into your passionate authenticity. Connect with me to ignite your inner wisdom and light the way forward on your living path. You can reach me via my website or email, or on Facebook at Caravan of Dreams MT. Our music is used by permission of the artist, Sean Phoenix. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to Bozeman Public Library for the Workbench Sound Studio located in beautiful downtown Bozeman, Montana. If you would like to learn more about allowing and how to find your unique style of manifesting, please visit my website, caravanofdreamsmt.com, or email me at dancingwitchmt@gmail.com. This is Ginny Watts, the Dancing Witch. Till next time, blessed be.